Friday. So we found that they're in the catacombs. They're in Paris. Is a maze of bones underneath the ground in Paris. It's a real place. It's the catacombs of Paris. There's bones that line up the walls, and that's because they dug up graves from people because the cemeteries were overcrowded, and there already were tunnels underneath Paris because they used the limestone. They dug out limestone to help build their buildings. So they just filled the walls of those tunnels with bones, and they went back. Or the kids went on down into there. Alistair said he thinks they should go by themselves, but he also saw that Ian and Natalie went down there as well. They went farther and farther back and finally got to the oldest place, and they found those skulls that had Roman numerals scratched on them. And there were 3 skulls that were missing scratches. And they found out it was a magic box. That's the coordinates in a box. It's a magic box, basically, where you add all the numbers down and all the numbers across, and there always could be the same number. And it was 39, wasn't it?
Yes.
39 down. So if you add all the numbers, they equal 39. Oh, yeah. Oh, yes. Yep. It's speech. So there's 39 all the directions, and Ian and Natalie came in, and we're going to try to steal their clue. And Amy threatened actually to break the skulls that had the things on it. But Natalie had a little dart gun that had poison in it and was going to shoot Amy in the forehead. But Alistair O came to their rescue and knocked over Natalie. And then Nellie, Dan, and Amy ran off deeper into the catacombs. And we don't know what happened to Alistair, Natalie, or Ian. But they were trapped down there, and their light went out. And they heard a sound, and it turned out it was a train rumbling. And they followed that sound to where they could pull off this metal grate and found a way out. But right now, Dan is stuck on the tracks. He's trying to get out, and there's a train coming, and his backpack's stuck on a railing. And he doesn't want to leave it because his parents' the only picture of his parents is in the backpack. He said it won't open. That's what he yelled out. He yells, "It won't open." And that's where he left off. And Amy and Nellie are like, "Get off the tracks. The train's coming in." Well, Dan, no, it's just a backpack. It won't open. It won't open. The far end of the tunnel lit up. Nellie was right above them on the platform, reaching out her hand. A lot of other passengers were doing the same, imploring them to grab hold. "Amy," Nellie cried, "you first." She didn't want to, but maybe she went first and would see reason. She grabbed Nellie's hand, and Nellie hauled her from the rail pit. Immediately, Amy turned and stuck her hand out to Dan. "Dan," she cried, "please," she called, "now." The train's headlight flashed into sight. Wind rushed through the tunnel. The ground trembled. Dan gave the backpack another tug, but it wouldn't budge. He looked at the train, and Amy saw he was crying. She didn't understand why. "Dan, take my hand." She leaned out as far as she could. The train barreled down on them. With a cry of anguish, Dan grabbed her hand, and with more strength than Amy knew she had, she yanked him out of the pit so hard they tumbled over top of each other. The train rushed on. When the noise died, the passengers on the platform all broke loose at once, scolding them in French, while Nellie tried to explain and apologize. Amy didn't care what they were saying. She held her little brother, who was crying harder than he had since he was little. Why is he crying so hard? The picture's gone. There's no way it survived that train hitting it. That backpack's destroyed, and so is the one picture he had of his parents. He has no pictures of his parents now. She looked over the edge of the pit, but the backpack was gone, swept away into the tunnels by the force of the train. They sat for a long time while Dan shivered and wiped his eyes. Eventually, the passengers lost interest in them. They drifted away or stepped onto other trains and disappeared. No police came. Pretty soon, it was just Nellie, Amy, and Dan sitting on the corner of a platform like a homeless family. "Dan," Amy said gently, "what was in there? What did you have in that backpack?" He sniffled and rubbed his nose. "Nothing." It was the worst lie Amy had ever heard. Usually she could tell what he was thinking just by looking at his face, but he was hiding his thoughts from her. She could only tell that he was miserable. "Forget it," he said. "We don't have time." "Are you sure?" "I said forget it. We need to figure out that number box before the Cabras, don't we?" She didn't like it, but he was right. Besides, something told her if they stayed here much longer, the police would come and start asking questions. She took one last look in the rail pit where Dan had almost died. and the dark hatch that led to the catacombs. Fear still coursed through her body, but they'd been through too much to give up now. Let's go then, she said. We've got a clue to find. Make sure you're listening at the same time. And I know it's hard not to try to get your neighbor's attention and talk to him, but now it's not the time to do that. Outside, it had started to rain. By the time they found a cafe, Dan seemed to be back to normal, or at least they'd come to a silent agreement they would act like everything was normal. They sat under the awning to dry off while Nellie ordered food. Amy didn't think she could eat, but she was hungrier than she'd realized. It was 5 p.m. They'd been in the catacombs for a long time. Remember, they had an early lunch, so they should be pretty hungry. She shuddered as she thought about Ian and Natalie and the poison dart gun. She hoped Uncle Alistair was all right. She still didn't trust him, but there's no denying he'd saved them in the catacombs. She had terrible thoughts of the old man lying alone and unconscious in the maze. As they ate brie and mushroom sandwiches, Dan drew skulls and Roman numerals on a napkin. 12, 5, 14, he said. Those are the missing numbers. They should sound familiar because those are the missing numbers you guys found on Friday. Amy didn't bother checking his math. He was never wrong on number problems. Maybe it's an address in an arrondissement, she said. Nellie wiped after her iPod. Wouldn't the address have changed in 200 years? She's got a good point. In 200 years, the address would have changed. It wouldn't have been the same address. Because think of just our town. We had new streets and roads all the time. And it changes things. Amy got a hollow feeling in her gut. Nellie was probably right. Paris may not have the arrondissement system and Franklin lived here. And street addresses definitely would have changed, in which case Franklin's clue is no good anymore. Would Grace have sent them on a search that couldn't be finished? Why not? A resentful voice said inside of her. Grace didn't care enough to tell you about the quest in person. If Dan had died in that rail pit, it would have been Grace's fault. No, she decided. That wasn't true. Grace must have had a reason. The numbers must refer to something else. Amy could only think of one way to find out. The same thing she did whenever she had an unsolvable problem. We need a library. Nellie talked to the waiter in French, and he seemed to understand what they wanted. Pose de problème, he said. He drew a map on a fresh napkin and scribbled the name of a metro station. École Militaire. We have to hurry, Nellie said. He says the library closes at 6. Half an hour later, soggy and still smelling like the catacombs, they arrived at the American Library in Paris. Perfect, Amy said. The old building had black metal security bars over the doorway, but they were open. Peering inside, Amy saw stacks of books and plenty of comfortable places to read. Why should these guys help us? Dan asked. I mean, we don't even have a library card or anything. But Amy was already climbing the steps. For the first time in days, she felt absolutely confident. This was her world. She knew what to do. The librarians came to her aid like soldiers responding to a battle cry. Amy told them she was researching Benjamin Franklin, and within minutes, Amy, Dan, and Nellie were sitting at a table in a conference room examining reproductions of Franklin documents. Some so rare, the librarians told her, that only copies existed in Paris. Yeah, here's a rare grocery list, Dan muttered. Wow. He was about to toss it aside when Amy grabbed his wrist. Dan, you never know what's important. Back then, there weren't many stores. If you wanted to buy something, you had to send the merchant an order and have your stuff shipped. What did Franklin buy? By the way, it is important. That grocery list? Oh, it is. Dan sighed. Please send to the following: 3 treatises on cider making by Cave, 2 Nelson on the Government of Children, 8th volume by Dodsley, 1 quantity iron salute, letters from a Russian soldier. Hold it, Amy said. Iron salute. Where have I heard that before? It was on that other list, Dan said without hesitation. In one of the letters we saw in Philadelphia. Amy frowned. But Iron Salute isn't a book. This whole list is books except that. What is Iron Salute anyway? Dan asked. Oh, guys, I know this, Nellie chimed in. She held up her hands and closed her eyes like she was remembering an answer for a test. It's like a chemical solution, right? They use it for metalworking and printing and a bunch of other stuff. Amy stared at her. How did you know that? Hey, I took chemistry last semester. I remember because the professor was talking about how like they make high-end cooking equipment. Franklin was probably used iron solute for his ink when he was a printer. That's great, Dan muttered, except for the fact that it's completely unimportant. Now, can we get back to the magic box coordinates? Amy still felt something nagging in the back of her head, like she was missing a connection. But she rifled through the rest of the papers. Hey, she said that she probably used it for printing, right? But when he was in France, he was an ambassador. He wasn't doing his printing business. So it's a weird time to ask for printing materials. Finally, she unfolded a huge yellowing document that turned out to be an old-fashioned map of Paris. Her eyes widened. This is it. Amy put a finger proudly over a spot on the map. A church, Saint Pierre de Montmartre. That's where we need to go. How can you be so sure? Nellie asked. The numbers form a grid. See? She pointed to the margins. This is an old surveyor's map by a couple of French scientists, Comte Buffon and Thomas Francois de Labarre. I remember reading about them. They were the first to test Franklin's lightning rod theories. After they proved the rod's works, King Louis XVI ordered them to draw up a plan to outfit all the major buildings in Paris. That church was the 14th installation at coordinates 4 by 12 or 5 by 12. Franklin would have known about this work. He was really proud of how the French took to his ideas. That has to be it. I bet you a box of French chocolates will find an entrance to the catacombs at the church. Dan looked doubtful. Outside, the rain was really coming down. Thunder shook the windows of the library. What if the Cobbers get there first? We have to make sure that doesn't happen, Amy said. Come on. Chapter 17. Dan felt like one of the catacomb skulls, hollowed out inside. He was determined not to show it. He was embarrassed that he cried on the train platform, but he kept reaching for his backpack and it wasn't there. He couldn't stop thinking about his parents' picture whisked away and lost in the metro tunnels. Maybe it had been ripped to shreds, or maybe his parents would be smiling in the darkness forever with no company but the rats. All he wanted to do was make his parents proud. Now he didn't know if his parents would ever forgive him. Do you think his parents would really be mad about a picture? But in his mind, they probably are, because he's sad. The rain was still coming down. Thunder boomed across the sky. Every few minutes, a flash of lightning would illuminate the Paris skyline. If Dan had been in a better mood, he would have wanted to explore Montmartre. It looked like a cool neighborhood. The whole area was one big hill topped at the massive white domed church that glowed in the rain. That's where we're going? Dan asked. Amy shook her head. That's the Sacré-Cœur Basilica. The smaller church, St. Pierre's, below it. You can't see it from here. And that's where we stop. Gotta look that up on Google Maps.